Good morning and a Freilich Hanukkah. Welcome back. I welcome myself back.
Freilich Hanukkah, welcome back.
Thank you. Okay, so to get back to where we're up to in Ayin Beis, we concluded the Sefer Hemshech Ayin Beis as far as the Rebbe Rashab wrote it, and we're going back now, looking at the source material to further understand and develop what the Rebbe Rashab may have written, because he based it on the Maimer of Nika Hashem Elokeinu HaChanukah Maimer of the Alter Rebbe said in Chanukah in the year Tov Kuf Samach Vav, and then elaborated upon by the Mittler Rebbe, which we're in the middle of learning. So we learned the Maimer in Torah and the Bereishis explanation. We're now middle of the beginning, closer to the beginnings of the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. Began in Maamorei AdHamtz Bereishis, Chanukah Maimer, began 361, and we are up to now. We are up to page 364 or 365 already. 364. Yeah. Good. No, sorry, 365. 365. We finished the paragraph on 365, and I'm going to sum up what we've learned and where we're up to. So Hashgacha Pratis, it's a Chanukah Maimer, so it's very fitting to the time that we're in right now, and that specifically what he's addressing here is Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam and Ner Mitzvah V'Torah. But the focus now is on Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Later in the Maimer, he's going to go to Ner Mitzvah V'Torah like he does in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. And what we learned, that there are three components to the Ner. There's the wick, the divine soul, as it manifests within the body and the animal soul, which is the oil, the shemen. And the kavanah is the whole purpose of neshama coming down below is not for itself, it's to transform the animal soul, the oil, into an oil that will feed and nourish and fuel the love of the divine of God. So it should be drawn into and absorbed by the wick, and in turn create a flame, which is the flame, the eish, the fire, the oir Hashem, the avos Hashem, v'haftas Hashem lekecha b'chol vavcha b'shnei yitzarech. That's what we learned. That's in general. To understand that well, and why it's all the details, he asked the question: how is it possible for neshama to do that? The question that he asked, I just want to read it inside because that's a question that he's in the middle of explaining, and that is where he asked the question like this. Let me just find where it is. Yeah. The mehechin yesh koyach b'neshama. Where does the soul have the power? Lahafich leteva harad nefesh adam hatevis, to transform the selfishness or the evil of the natural soul. Shu anikri yetzer hara shu ra b'tchilas habriya. Machash anikri yetzer hara. It's fundamentally, inherently, from creation. Its inclination is toward evil. So how does the neshama have that power? Similar question that he asked in Torah and Alter Rebbe and Mittler and the Rebbe Rashab as well in Ayin Beis, as we already pointed out. So to explain that, he went back to understand what's the difference in Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tev, which is both from Lashon Yetzirah. That's how they are. That's the Yetzirah. That their root is, we have to understand their root in Emek Tev and Emek Ra, as he explained. And based on their root, that's how they're defined below. So we now know that there's a root, not just for the Yetzer Tev, but also for the Yetzer Hara. And he explained on page 364 that there's the difference in Ruach HaAdam El Lamayla and Ruach HaBehema Yeredes Lamata. So first he elaborated, which we on page 364 and 365, the Mittler Rebbe, what it means Ruach HaAdam El Lamayla. So he explains that's the neshama that is rooted in the highest levels of B'Tselem Elokim, all the way in the level of Yechida, and even when it comes down below, it retains its divine personality, what he called Getlech. And that also permeates its Seichel and its Midas, that the Seichel, all its involvement is its mind of the Nefesh Elokis is to understand divine things. And it's not capable of understanding, it says, Lo Yisugol, the expression he used was, Lo Taske Rak Medovesh Misharsha, which is Elokus. Lo Yisugol Ezel Haskel Haven, anything else. Right. Good. In that itself, he said there's a number of levels, because the neshamas are not alike, one to the other. But all of them, no matter who they are, they all have that divine element. The neshamas that relate more to chesed, like he said, there are those that relate more to gvura. That's their primary way of serving. And he's explained, so what happens is like this, it's rooted, like he said in Keser, in the Mazel, is the root of the divine soul, but then when it comes down, it travels through Chachma Bina, as he explained, and then to Chesed or Gvura, then each one according to its midah, that's how it's born, the birth of a new birth of a Yelid Yispalis Ava, Yispalis Yida. So the Nefesh Elokis on its own is beyond, even in the mind, it's not yet an emotional reaction. That requires a hisbonenus, a contemplation. That's why you won't find in the divine soul that it's always in a state of Ava v'yira. That's why midas are called a tulda, a birthing. They have to be birthed. So like he said, from the Yechida and Keser, gives the power into Chachma and Bina to give birth to the Midas, which is the Yetzer Tov, Neiled v'Netzer b'chinas hamokar asmi etzem hatesh nikra emek tev. Whereas the way the nefesh is on its own, as it understands things, it's not called yet Yitzira, a new shape. That's what he concluded by saying, the last parentheses, I'm just summing up, that the word, that in other words, B'ri Yitzira is already a lower level of the soul. And the fact that we say B'ri Yitzira also on the Neshamas, Vayivra, Vayotzar, so he says that's Dafkal Etzem Hatev B'chinas Emek Tev Yechida. 1 second. Oh, that's already how the neshama comes down into Kalim. But as it is higher than Kalim, it's beyond the structure of of what he just said, the structure of Midas. So now we have also placed an understanding how the Nefesh Elokis works. Its root, it's a divine root. That divine root in turn, through contemplation, gives birth to a Midah. So there you have the structure of the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, which is the Midas. These are the Midas that are directed by the Seichel that's rooted all the way in the Yechida Shabanefesh, in the core of the soul. But even as it comes down into Seichel and Midas, the divine soul is completely preoccupied with its mind in divine matters, and its emotions are emotions of godly emotions. Love of God, reverence of God. Yeah. Okay, and with that we concluded the parentheses on page 365. So I'm ready to continue now. The bottom of page 365 in the Mittler Rebbe's Maamorei AdHamtz Bereishis. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And we're ready to go. So here we are. 4 lines from the bottom. The new paragraph goes like this. V'hinei, now we all discussed was the divine soul. Now we have to go back to Ruach HaBehema Yeredes Lamata. There's the animal soul. So he says, Similarly, will understand in the parallel world that God created Zeh, L'Uma Zeh, this corresponding to this. So everything that he created in Kedusha, like he explains in Tanya, he also created in L'Uma Zeh, on the other side. So Nefesh Habamis too has Seichel and Midos. That's the Yetzer Hara, is the Midos of the Nefesh Habamis. But obviously it functions in a very different way. Its interests are different. The divine soul is directed and simply and exclusively by Elokus Getlichkeit, Getlich. And the animal soul, as we're going to explain now, is driven by its own survival, its own interests. She says, now we'll understand, and what we just discussed, we'll understand also on the other side. That's the spirit of the animal soul. Like we said, Ruach Behema, at the top of the previous page, she explained, Ruach Adam the spirit of Adam, the soul of a human being, like a flame, rises above, like a flame. Tolakus. And the animal soul, it descends downward. Shehi hu heipach memoyach the ruach ha'adam the nefesh halikisa elamayla. That's the diametric opposite. That's the opposite direction from the moyach of the spirit of the animal. I'm sorry, from the moyach of the spirit of the human, of the divine soul, which ascends above. So you have two different spirits. One goes going upward, one is going downward. Canal. How's our connection? Is it all right? Okay. You all can hear me fine?
Yeah, it's working well enough. There's a tiny pauses, but it's fine.
Okay. Because like he said before, kol ikar, the primary, kol ikar actually means not the primary, it means the entirety. In Hebrew, the word ikar sometimes means primary, but kol ikar would mean its entire personality and nature of the animal soul. Shenikra teva nefesh achiyunis, which is called nefesh achiyunis. It's called the living soul. Remember, we said before different names: Nefesh Habamis, Nefesh Hachayunis, Nefesh Hativis. He used Nefesh Hamaskelas, Hasichlis. So he says, "Mamish le'uma zeh v'neged ha'kedusha." I'm not sure if the Mamish goes on Nefesh Hachayunis or goes further on le'uma zeh. But either way, it's le'uma zeh. It's the exact opposite, and neged and opposes Kedusha. Why? Because its entire will and desire is to be drawn downward. Remember, Ruach HaBehema Yeredes Lamata, Lidvek. What means downward? Lidvek Uliskasha Bedover Gufni V'chumri. Next page, 366. To attach itself and to bind itself in material and corporeal and crass matters. In all matters, in all ways of physical desires, mamish like the spirit of an animal. What means animal here? An animal means, what is it interested in? It's interested in eating, in breeding, in surviving, in protecting its young. It's all gashmistic things. Now, obviously, the animal soul is worse than an animal. An animal itself is created to be that way. The animal soul, basically on its own, without guidance and direction, what is it driven? For its own needs, its own pleasures. Like he says, mamish keruach behema mamish. And that's the ruach behema lamata, because as I mentioned, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, a behema never saw heaven. A behema came on the himmel nicht gesehen. Because a behema looks downward, because that's its physiological makeup is aligned with its psychological makeup, which is what? Its spiritual makeup, which is its function is to survive, is to exist. It's not to aspire and reach higher states of divine awareness and consciousness, as the divine soul aspires to. So Ruach HaBehema, the human being, is parallel. On the other side, in other words, like an alter ego, a parallel world. Neged HaKedusha, because its interest is selfish desires. Whereas before we learn Nefesh Elokis, doesn't even know anything about, doesn't even understand worldly matters, let alone desire. the Nefesh Elokis is completely focused on understanding and feeling godliness. So Zeu Shekosav, and this is what it means, this is what is right, that he writes, the Pasuk says, Ki Ruach HaBehema Yeredes Lemata, that the Ruach HaBehema, the breath of the animal, Ruach could be the spirit of the animal, descends downward, Shetomid Yiridosa Lemata, because it's constantly in a state of looking down, of going downward, Lismashech, Liskasher, Beshorsha, to be drawn and to connect, Beshorsha, Shenilka Chamesham. Where is the root of the animal soul? We learned before. It's going downward because it's a little confusing, the language, so let me explain. It's going downward to draw down to the Ilam Hazah, but what it's really following its root. Where is its root taken from? Nilka Chamesham. It's rooted, Shein Hicholas HaKlipa Shesharshan. This is the Hicholas, the chambers of Klipa. Remember the shell. What he explained earlier, that when he talked about Ruach HaBehema, I don't know if he said it explicitly, but in Teira Eir, he for sure said it. That's rooted in Tohu. I think he mentioned here also earlier, if I recall correctly. Yeah. But regardless, it's rooted in that place. Yeah, the bottom of, when he said in Eimekra, that is rooted in Eimekra. Kisin the Masavusa, the Klippus Nega, the bottom of 363. So it's rooted in the Klippus above. Klippa, remember, on its own is only a shell to protect the fruit. But that shell, when it comes down below, can become the root of all selfishness. Shesharshem is Zayin Midos, or Zayin Melochim. It's rooted in the 7 emotions, or Zayin is also the 7 kings. Shenoflu b'shviras hakelim ki yadua. That fell during the shattering of the containers of the world of Tohu. So we learned there that Vayimlach Mayamos, there are 7 kings corresponding to the 7 emotions of Tohu. And there's Vayimlach, it ruled like a keser, powerfully, but there was no kelim to hold on to. It's Vayomos. So Kabbalah, Chassidus explain, Vayomos is the shviras hakelim. That's the root of the Nefesh Abami, the Behema Yeredes Lemata. So the Behema is rooted there. When it comes down below, it's after the shattering of the containers, it is drawn, therefore, to the taivas of this world. The Nefesh Elokis is the world of Tikkun, like we learned. In the world of Tikkun, everything is aligned with godliness, and the Eris and Kelim are all in harmony. But in the world of Tohu, you have this imbalance that ultimately leads and is the root of the Nefesh Abamis. Okay. The Iker Hashvira, well, let me stop here for a moment. The parentheses, if there are any questions. All good? Okay. So it says now in the parentheses, V'ikar Hashvira hu, the Midos dafke. The primary Shvira, so let me go back to Tohu. Actually, I think that Tzemach Tzedek also brings this interesting. Okay. So Tohu, as we know, is, as I said, it's a world, a dimension of very intense energy. After Akudim, the 10 energies in one container, the energies further evolved, and now you have 10 energies in 10 containers, but it's not balanced yet. So there's tension. There's a lack of interconnectivity, there's no hiskalulus. And therefore, ultimately, it creates a tension that can be contained, and that's what Kabbalah calls shviras hakelim, the shattering of the containers. Now, when you break it down, the Kabbalah Chassidus explained that the shvira did not affect all the levels the same way. The real shvira is in the lower levels, especially in the emotions. Like you see, one of the examples Chassidus gives for it, who has a tantrum, children who don't yet have the full maturity of the mind at work, so their emotions can get the better of them. and it could have an outburst, a tantrum. So in other words, Midas is the place where there'll be the most tension of all when things are not balanced. The moichin of Tohu are affected by the shvira because they're also not balanced completely. But moichin by nature is not as, let's call it volatile, as Midas can be. I don't want to go into all the details of this, explained in other places, but I have to say it enough to be able to understand what he's going to say now. Because he wants to come back. Remember, the Alter Rebbe in Torah in the Maimer spoke about the difference between the seichel of the nefesh halakis and the midas of the nefesh halakis, which is called yetzer tov. The same thing in the nefesh habamis. There's the seichel of the nefesh habamis, and then he called the midas of the nefesh habamis. The midas is the place where the primary nefesh habamis. When you say someone is passionate about the desires of this world, yes, the mind of the nefesh habamis is focusing on its own needs, but it's the emotions where it really takes hold, where we become consumed with it. So the Yetzer Hara refers to the emotions. So he's saying like this: the Ikar Ashvira in Tohu, who Midas Dafke, is explicitly, specifically in Midas, in the emotions, the Ikar Shvira. There's even a very fascinating Rishima from the Rebbe's father, where he talks about doing Shvira. Trying to remember the Lashain is there. Shvira, Yerida, and a third language, where he explains that in Tohu itself, there's the breaking is literal shattering. Nefila would be it goes down a level, and there's a third expression that is something in between to explain the different ways, the different spheres of Tohu are affected. Okay, al kain ikar ruach habehema hu b'tayvus roz v'gasus. That's why the primary ruach habehema, meaning in the animal soul, is b'tayvus roz v'gasus. It's in selfish or evil and grub and crass desires. Shahu eish zora. Where's that coming from? That's the strange fire, or the alien fire, the passion. B'chein kosher b'yeser. Very heated and very passionate desire. So when you see a person who's really completely consumed and obsessed with the taiva, and we all, I'm sure, familiar with it from our own experiences, is a certain amount of almost like almost a demon takes over. We literally have no control of yourself because you're passionate about it. It's not just you're thinking about it, you're passionate about it. And he says that's where the real klippa takes hold. That's what he says here. That's the ikar and the midas. It's a ezara b'chem kosher b'yeser. And he says, Shemipnei zeh, and due to that fact, the nefesh habamis has this fiery passion for a desire, for a pleasure. It's called nikra behema boyer. It's called boyer, like something that is how do you translate boyer? Burning. I want to see below. Do there. So mishpatim he calls vayishlach as beirei. I'm sorry. How do you translate? Let's see. Can someone look up mishpatim in the Chav Beis Daled that it says below 22:4?
Beiroi is your
Is what?
always in Ezekiel.
Hamavir, yeah.
Hevel.
So there's two. There's either it's translated as either it's yeah. Let me look it up. Let me look it up myself. How do they translate it in the posture? That's what I want to see.
It's like burning.
Yeah, as I said, fiery, burning, right. Is that how they translated there?
Well, the modern Hebrew, be'ira is burning. and they don't translate ba'ir itself.
Yeah, Bernie,
I
that's
don't-
what I thought. I just want to make sure. Let's see how it is in the pasuk. Let me see. Okay, the Gemara talks about Mavir is either fire or it's the ox. That we know. I just look in the pasuk. Ki yivar ish sada kerem v'shalach as be'irei. Be'ira. You hear the touching animal. In the Arba Ovos Nezikin that was just mentioned. So the fourth one is Hamavir, and Mavir is translated. There's two opinions. Either it's fire, or it's a goring ox. So here he's touching it definitely from the word fire. That's why the animal soul is called boyer. Shemavir be'esh, because it's burning with fire. Hatayvus belev ke'esh mamish, like a burning fire. So that's why you describe passionate desire like a burning fire inside of you. So this is all coming to show that that's where the primary manifestation of the animal soul, which is rooted in the Midos of Tohu of the Shviras HaKelim, the Midos Shanofel of Shviras HaKelim, that's where you have the primary power of the Shviras in the Midos. That's what he's saying here. The ruach, that's behema. Who b'chinas ban the klipas nega, like we learned earlier. Ban is gematria behema. That's the ban of klipas nega. Remember, ban is a name that is a permutation, one of the permutations of the yud ke vav ke. When it's written now, there's ma ban sag ab, but there's also ban in klipa. In Lumazah, the klipa say gematria behema, gematria behema, 52. Shesharsha b'shem ban de Tohu, because the animal soul is rooted in the name of ban in Tohu. Shenikra behema rabba kiyadua. That's sometimes called the great animal, the great behema, the great bull, cow. Rabba from the Psukim says expression behema rabba. Rabba can also mean very intense, very strong, very powerful. In this case, this powerful passion. That is the with that. Let me see here. I want to see where the parentheses ends. Oh, then the Ruach HaOdam Hu Shem Ma, and in that context, by contrast, the Ruach HaOdam, going back to the divine soul, it is the Shem Ma Gematria Odam, the Tikkun, Shemavar Laban de Behema, which we also learned in the Alter Rebbe's mind. So Ma'av Tikkun is the one that refines, separates, and clarifies, and refines the ban of Behema canal, like he said earlier. Okay, so far we've established that just like the divine soul has its seichel and midas is completely divine, the animal soul on the other side of the coin, the other end of the spectrum, is driven by animalistic desires, the passionate ones, and primarily it's in the midas. Okay. Are there any questions? If not, I'll continue.
I have a question, Rabbi Jacobson. I know in Ayin Beis we also discussed in the past that neshama of tzaddikim, basically, we discussed that all neshamot basically come of neshamot of Atzilut. But then what happens is, for tzaddikim, they have almost like an express train. They bypass Beria Yetzira and they come to Asiya. Versus the rest of the, for majority, they go through Bria Yetzira. Is it fair to say that this is exactly what the story is, that in potential, the tzaddikim also have this animalistic soul, but it's in just a potential state. The only actualization of the animal soul is when the soul travels through Beria and Yetzira. Is that a fair statement? And that's why tzaddikim don't have nefesh habahamis per se, because they have an express train bypass this other route.
So I'm not clear with your questions. Are you asking me if a tzaddik has a nefesh habahamis from Tohu? Or you're
Correct.
asking me a different
I'm
question?
asking that, but because they have an express train and they don't go through Beria and Yetzira, it never gets actualized. Versus the rest of neshamot,
Well,
they go through it. Is that a fair thing to say?
Not necessarily, because in Tanya, basically, it seems that the tzaddik works on himself, not because there's no automatics. The tzaddik may be rooted in Atzilus, but then through his avodah, he also eliminates his Yetzer Hara and Nefesh Habamis. That needs to be discussed and looked into the Maamorei of how the tzaddik really reaches a level of destroying the Nefesh Habamis. Not really relevant here at all. Here, the question would only be, does he have a Nefesh Habamis from Tohu that he has now either eliminated or transformed, as he says in chapter 10 in Tanya, chapter 9 and 10. How he does it, whether it's because he's able to bypass Bria Tzir Asiyah, or he does it because through his strong Aveda, is out of the scope of this conversation altogether. That we have to look at other Maamorei. But regarding our discussion here, you could say is that Tzaddik does have Nefesh Halikis for sure. The Nefesh Habamis, you could say he's born with it and then eliminates it, or you could say he's not born with it and he's given a particular power to either transform it. It's mashma from Tanya that he does transform it. Whether Tzaddik Gam or Tzaddik Sheina Gam is the extent of how much he transforms it. That's as much as I can say based on my knowledge of Tanya and what he's saying here. If the question of the worlds that you're mentioning, that I would have to go look up elsewhere, or you can look it up if you want to.
Thank you.
Okay. Ulakach Isa, and that's why it says the ein adam ever aver elim ken nichnas by ruach shtus. So we know the Maimon Chazal say that a person does not sin unless what enters into him is a ruach shtus. Ruach shtus can be translated a moment of insanity, a spirit of insanity, a moment of folly, a spirit of folly, foolishness. Shtus has many different meanings, but in Basligani he talks about it in the context of a person inclining himself the wrong direction, meaning the shtus the kedusha, going beyond your rationale in holiness, and there's also going beyond the rational in unholiness, in the negative. So ruach shtus, ki behema, like a behema, sheruach habehema yiredes lamata dafke. So he's connecting ruach shtus to ruach habehema. Shtus here in the context that it's immersing itself in its own pleasures, and that's what Naveda is. The ruach shtus is the ruach habehema, that yiredes lamata dafke canal. And le'emek ra shemesham moker kol hamshachas taivas ras. So emek ra means in the depths of the abyss of ra. He descends into the emek ra, into negative and selfish and passionate animalistic desires, and that emek ra is rooted kol hamshachas the taivas ras. That's where it's all rooted. So emek ra can go also down below, but it's rooted like we learned earlier. Emek teiv, emek ra. It's rooted in the depths all the way in Tohu, what he calls Emek Ra here, meaning the roots of the klipa above. Bottom line is what he's saying here is that it's not just behaving a certain way, it's being driven by its very nature. Like we spoke before, Nefesh Halikis is rooted in the Yechida and the highest levels in Emek Tev, and that's why it defines its mind and its emotions are defined accordingly. Same thing with the animal soul. The animal soul is rooted in a place that is, like he says here, Tohu, in that place of Ban of Tohu, and that's why when it comes down, it's driven by its own selfish, passionate desires. Hamshachas taivas ras, all the negative, all the evil or selfish pleasures. So that covers the Midos. V'hine, and now, levad b'chinas hamidis. The behema she midis tivim. Besides the midis of the behema, of the animal, which are midis tivim, they're natural impulses. Shenimshachim achad taivas atzmei, that are drawn to taivas atzmei, his own selfish pleasures. Nikra ruach behema sheredes lamata. So besides the midas that are drawn to these taivas, and which is why it's called the root, the spirit of the animal that goes downward canal, like we said. So besides the midas, we also have the seichel. Remember, there's the seichel and the das and the awareness or the knowledge of the animal soul, of this animal soul. Sheshar mechol is the klipas nega. Like we said, it's rooted in the chambers of klipas nega. He says in the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, the nefesh habamis is rooted in klipas nega, not in gedusha. Not shalosh klipas atmeis, but klipas nega, the bright klipa shell. Sheyesh bo lahaskil lahovin binyoni elam hazeh. So the animal soul is not just a purely impulsive creature. The animal soul also has seichel, but its seichel that it has within it is to conceive and to understand binyoni elam hazeh in matters of this world. V'nikras nefesh hasichli is ba'adam, and that's called the nefesh hasichli sheba'adam. So he's now identifying clearly its level. It's the nefesh hasichli. So nefesh habamis is the general animal soul. The midas of the nefesh habamis he called yetzer hara. The seichel of the nefesh habamis is called nefesh hasichlis. Shebezeh yisreini ala behema hagashmis. And here he's distinguishing, even though it's compared to an animal, but this is its advantage over a physical animal. Shemeret sir kemose alzeh, which we see by a human being, even the animal soul, a person walks upright. Shemeret sir kemose alzeh, his very physiological makeup, sir kema, his structure. We see the way he stands is b'meshahela became a skufa. He walks upright. The lay became a kfufa, not inclined, not bent down like an animal. So we say zekev kfufim, which means to lift up those that are bent down, those that are leaning downward. So kizoki finish liyam. He says at the bottom. It says in brachas, the Gemara in brachas, he quotes lema zekev kfufim. It means to lift someone up. What does that mean? Because a human being by nature is not bent over. Animal is by nature walks on all four. So what you see from this is that the nefesh habamis has something that an animal, even though animals also have seichel, but it's called sometimes das hanikna, called more like impulsive seichel, more survival intelligence. Means an intelligence, it can be very intelligent in hunting, in protecting, and it can be very ingenious, but it's still all about survival. The difference in a human being is that the human being, even though he has an animal soul, we still walk upright because the seichel, that's why you could say human beings with their seichel and nefesh habamis can be far more destructive than any animal. As we've seen throughout history, that human beings use their intelligence for the wrong reasons, they can become extremely harmful and destructive. Doesn't say it explicitly here, but he's saying he's distinguishing between the behema and the nefesh habamis. Okay. Im kol zeh. So even though we just made this distinction, hadi anuroyim shekol in haskalose b'sichle, that even though it's superior to the animal, but it's still, what is its primary? We see what is its seichel involved in? What is its intelligence involved in? Ein rak binyanim gashmim. It's only for physical matters. Im b'tzarchei gufei, either in physical, in the body's needs. It's desire, like his desire to find ways, methods to gain great wealth, or gedula, or gedula means honor, or to develop his seichel, but it's only related to his midas alone. His physical midas, basically to use his mind for his own benefits. That should be for his benefit and not to his detriment. So all this is seichel, but it's a seichel all about himself, all about this world. For the record, Ayin Beis quotes this piece on page. That's why I one second. That's why I pointed out that Ayin Beis definitely the Rebbe Rashab is both quoting the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. So if you go to page this thing with Hein V'Esha, that this piece is actually quoted in Ayin Beis right here. Let me tell you what page it's on. I believe. 1 second. Yeah. On page 1464, the Rebbe Rashab quoted this section and elaborated upon it on 1464. So I see from that he clearly is quoting straight from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which is why it made it even clearer to me that we should learn it all, because the Rebbe Rashab definitely used this as source material, even though it's obvious from the content, but there's actually words that he uses only from Mittler Rebbe, not the Alter Rebbe. Because these words are from the Mittler Rebbe alone. He added all this. Okay.
Where specifically does he say it in 9 base?
1464.
Where on 1464? Do you
Middle
know?
of the page.
Offhand?
Right in the middle.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Let me stop for any questions and then we'll continue.
I have the question about the shorus of the Seichel Nefesh Bahamas, which he just said here somewhere. That it was in the past sentence or two. I'm trying to find exactly his lashon.
The Sharta Behechal is the Klippas Nega.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know how. I mean, I understand what literally Hechalas Klippas Noga, but what level is that? Like, where's Klippas Noga?
Most likely in Tohu. Most likely Tohu.
Okay. Thank you.
Just keep in mind, Tohu is a holy world, but it's a world of tension, filled with a lack of balance. So even though Tohu itself, you can't identify as being anything negative, but it's definitely the root. I always use psychologically, if a person experiences, for example, trauma or shock or anything that shakes up your system, that alone doesn't mean that it's going to be destructive in your life. It could also be tempered, it could be tamed, it could be harnessed. But very often when you see people act out in very serious ways or not so serious ways, you can root it back to some type of tension they had earlier. So Tohu would be like the breeding ground, just to give a little explanation, a little like the breeding ground, an environment where things are not like, let's think of a dysfunctional home. Not guaranteed that a dysfunctional home is going to produce necessarily a mass murderer or a person who's going to be a criminal. But it's more likely because the environment is breeding it. It's an environment that's not healthy, meaning it's not balanced properly. So parents arguing or other types of dysfunctional behavior. I don't want to compare exactly, it's just an example. So Tohu, because of its lack of balance, it becomes the place that once there's the shvira, the tension creates a shattering, a breaking of the containers, that can lead to the klippas that we have in this world, which in turn can lead to all other problems. And it's all a result of the tzimtzum arishin. I'm just adding explanation because just to contextualize it a bit. Meaning, if God had not concealed his presence, there would be one singularity. There would be no dissonance altogether. It would be just divine consciousness. But as soon as there's the concealment creates an environment where there's going to be imbalance because there's two states of consciousness now, God's consciousness and our consciousness. That alone does not mean it has to go the wrong way. But once it goes further, Tohu is a type of market correction, a reality check that has to respond to that dissonance that the tzimtzum created. That in turn would lead to the shattering of the containers, which leads to the diminishment of the moon, which leads to the chet tzadas, as Chassidus explains. Just a little context. Then it comes down below. That's where the nefesh habamis is rooted, and that's where the nefesh habamis on its own can be very disconnected from its source and pursue its selfish desires. However, as we're going to learn, the whole point is that the nefesh halakis harnesses and tames and educates the animal soul Not only that it should not go off on its own, but it should love God. And more than that, as we're going to learn, that actually increases the love of Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha because it's drawing from the intensity of Tohu, as we learned in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. Just to give you a little more context, the Mittler Rebbe elaborates more, so he's not going to get back to this points till quite a few pages from now. But in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, we clearly learned that. We said clearly why the shemen is the main force that feeds the fire, not the wick. The wick is the divine soul, but the shemen, once it's harnessed, it has tremendous power to empower, to nourish, to feed and fuel the love of God. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're learning the very nature of the animal soul in contrast to the nature of the divine soul.
Thank you. One quick follow-up, if I may, and if it's off the reservation, you can tell me that and move on. But the follow-up question is, we learn in Tanya that Klippa generally, Klippas Noga, where does it get its energy from, its strength from? And I forgive me, I cannot quote the Tanya verbatim, but essentially he says Me'achoraim, that Kedusha gets directly from the Eberster, gets direct feed of divine energy. But there's Zelu Matzeh, everything's counterbalanced, even holiness, godliness is counterbalanced by the mundane or the even worse, like what he's talking about here, the coarse, the grub. But he says, where is it getting its energy from? He says, Ma'achoraim. Okay, so one would think, when we say Achoraim, like kind of leftovers, if you will. That's okay, that's what it means. But if we're saying at the same time that Klippa is generally rooted in Tohu, you're saying probably rooted in Tohu, it's a very high, powerful place. Tohu has technically more access to direct divine energy than Tikkun. But of course, it's not ordered. It's not L'Shem Shemaim. So it goes to all kinds of bad places. But fundamentally, which is why we know that we talk about Eino, that from the Dafka from the lowest levels, we find the greatest ability to rise to highest Elikus. But it seems like there's a tension between the sourcing in Tohu versus Me'achoraim, which you would think is kind of leftovers, is really not as powerful. Do you understand the tension, the question I'm asking?
The answer is very straightforward. That's why Shviras HaKelim, the Klippa is Achoraim. After the shattering of the containers, there's very, very little energy left. Because the containers were containing the energy, they shatter. So what's left is only very, very minimum energy. That's Achoraim. Achoraim comes after the shattering of the containers, correct?
I have a question that may be somewhat related to that.
You understand my answer? 1 second. Do you understand my answer?
Yes, 100%. But it's still
after the shattering. We're not talking about Tohu and its root. We're talking about once it comes down after the containers are shattered. Think of a book that you tear up all the pages. What kind of energy lies in each broken, each torn piece? Very little. It's only Achoraim at this point. But that's what the Shviras HaKelim do. That creates, and in Kedusha and Tikkun, it's full flow. Yeah, it's like a broken machine. It's yeah.
I completely understand that, and maybe now I'm going to go to the third point, which is processing too much. You're going to tell me let's wait. I'm pretty sure you're going to tell me let's wait. But it seems to me that one of the points of the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab was, well, actually, Rebbe Rashab didn't really go there yet, but in a sense, both did, that the nefesh, the sichlis of nefesh Bahamas, so the sichlis of the hativis, or nefesh achiyunus, all of these different words for the intellect of the animalistic soul, will ultimately feed. It's the fuel for the nefesh elokis. And
I described that earlier, and we're not there yet. That's the avodah that we need. We're talking here before avodah. Here we're talking about the very nature of the animal soul, not before the avodah. You're talking after the avodah now.
Right, but fuel is powerful. So it's dafka. It has the potential energy that's greater.
So, obviously, everything is like that in life. But the fact of the matter is, we had a Holocaust, we have wars. Well, at that point, the fuel is not going in the right direction.
Okay.
You're talking about after it goes in the right direction? Yeah, that's where we're going to get to. That's the Avodah. I mentioned before that ultimately is the Avodah. But right now we're talking about the very nature of the animal soul and how off it can go in its own selfish desires.
Oh, you're saying, Dafka, when it's being tapped with Shem Shemaim, that's when its power.
That's the
comes
Aveda
into-
of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, which we haven't
Right.
yet gotten to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I,
You were going
I
to
was,
ask something?
yes, thank you, Rabbi. I was just going to ask, so even all of this, excuse me, the tohu, everything, the shattering of the containers and all of this is all intentional to sort of go back to your idea of the dysfunctional family. I mean, all of this is Hashem's will.
What when you say all of this, what do you mean? You mean like the actual evil that people do, or do you
Not
mean
the evil that
the
people
structure
do, but
of the possibility for them of an
yeah, the
environment where,
potential, you know,
well,
can go
obviously,
either
as
way.
soon as God creates an existence called Tachtenim, as soon as He creates a world like ours, you read chapter 36 in Tanya, and He concealed His presence. You have the potential for all the problems that life brings. Yes.
But the disorder, like the chaos, that's all Hashem.
So you have to explain what you mean by chaos. Do you mean chaos when human beings go to war against each other, or do you
No,
mean
no.
the
I
energies
mean
in Tohu that are not balanced? What are you referring
those
to?
energies, the energies that the shattering of the sparks, all of that is all.
So that's why I explained. As soon as God concealed His presence and created another consciousness, which means independent consciousness of existence, you right away have the potential for chaos and tensions, because you have two entities now. It's like day 2 of creation. As soon as you have two people, the two people can work in harmony, but they could also go to war. So yes, God creates a world where we have free will to direct it either way. He says, I give you two paths, the path of life or the path of the opposite of life. So you're asking whether God created that environment? Absolutely. That's why He wants a desire. He desired to have a home in a world, precisely a world that's not a world of holiness, a world where there can be potential conflict and worse, and that we should be wise enough to create harmony and peace and Mashiach. So yes, God created intentionally that world, but that's the whole structure of concealment and then Tohu and so on. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and then in
That did not happen by accident. That was a very direct desire. It goes back to one line. God desired to have a home in the lowest of worlds. What does lowest mean? So in Tanya, chapter 36, He says lowest does not mean in space. He means lowest in divine concealment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll stop here. So middle of talking about now the animal soul's personality, and which of course opposes the divine souls. And once you establish that, going to come the question is, how then do you come to that's where Shema Yisrael and so on is going to come into play, how the animal soul will be tamed and ultimately be influenced by the divine soul. But right now he's still in the middle of talking about, if you want to compare it to Torah Er, this is the beginning of the Maimer in Torah Er. We talks, I believe, 38b, where that section, the bottom of 38b in Torah Er, is so far the Mittler Rebbe is elaborating and explaining that section. So as I said, we don't have the time to sit and compare. We learned it already, but if you want to really see the Mittler Rebbe's contribution, just go back to 38b at the bottom. You'll see the 10, 15 lines there from the Alter Rebbe is here becoming at least 3, 4, 5 pages so far. Yeah. It's actually even a few lines. Just maybe 5 lines of the Alter Rebbe is what is the source for what the Mittler Rebbe is developing here. So in the Mittler Rebbe's development, sometimes you can get lost in the woods because it's like a river. Like I said, a very expansive river. But we'll make it through. So we're at the bottom, we're close to the bottom of page 366. We'll stop here.